Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
Very, very serious story in the Mail on Sunday yesterday. Just to read you the first paragraph again. The Mail on Sunday today reveals astonishing evidence that the organisation that is the world's leading source of climate data rushed to publish a landmark paper that exaggerated global warming and was timed to influence the historic Paris Agreement on climate change. That organisation is America's National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. The whistleblower, a man called Dr. John Bates, a top scientist with that organisation, the Mail says, with an impeccable reputation, he showed the Mail on Sunday irrefutable evidence that the paper was based on misleading and unverified data. Listen to that again. Publishing a paper, rushing it out with unverified and exaggerated data, exaggerating global warming, timed to influence the historic Paris Agreement on climate change. Now, our next guest is a fascinating lady. She was sick of the politicisation of global warming in academia, so sick of it that she left her tenured position at Georgia Tech. She's been attacked by colleagues and other academics for questioning the claims made by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and other scientists who use climate models to claim that humans are the main cause of recent global warming. I'm delighted to welcome to the programme Dr. Judith Curry. Judith, thanks for taking the call. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to join you.
It's our pleasure. I can't say that enough. It's our pleasure, Judith. First of all, what is your reaction to the story in the British Mail on Sunday yesterday that Dr. John Bates showed the Mail irrefutable evidence that a paper produced by that organisation in time for the Paris Climate Conference was based on misleading and unverified data? It's a massive story. What do you think?
Well, I've been talking to John Bates about this for the past 18 months. He wrote a detailed essay on my blog, Climate Etc., JudithCurry.com, providing some of the more technical details that he's concerned about. So, I'm very concerned about this issue where we're, apparently seeing a governmental organization playing politics with climate data and not following its own guidelines for version control and archival and things like that.
Judith, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I really don't, and I'm not trying to. I think you're being very diplomatic there. I think you're being very fair. But isn't that almost borderline criminal, what they've done? If they're putting that information out, knowingly, knowing that it's misleading and that it's unverified and the data is inaccurate, and they're doing that specifically around the Paris Agreement, the Paris Conference, can't it be argued that they've committed a crime?
The issue is this. If this were just an issue of scientific research, somebody putting something out there to further discussion, understanding, etc., that's one thing. There's a different set of standards for that. However, when we're talking about a data set that's being used for international policy deliberations, with trillion-dollar decisions hinging on it, then very different standards need to come into play. And John Bates put into place these standards at NOAA, and he actually received a major award for that. But then the director of the NOAA Center proceeded to ignore all that in trying to push out his paper before the data set had been properly archived, vetted, documented, etc.
I would have imagined that there would have been not safety procedures, but there would have been procedures in place, Judith, to prevent that from happening. That's what would concern me, right?
Sure, but when the director of the lab or the center is the one, violating the protocol, and he's also someone who has a hotline to the White House through science advisor John Holdren. I mean, where's the checks and balances there?
Yeah. By the way, I'm aware of the fact that you've got a heavy cold there, have you? I can hear it. You're struggling. It is the season, Judith. It is the season for these things. So thanks for coming on. Despite that, I really appreciate that. I want to chat with you. I mean, that story is developing, and that story is going to continue to develop. By the way, Judith, has produced over 140 scientific papers, peer-reviewed papers. She's won awards. She's written books as well. She's an established and very well-respected academic. There's no doubt about that. Judith, what can you explain to our listeners you've coined this phrase, the uncertainty monster, and you've been very critical of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change for a long time because they don't pay attention to this. They won't acknowledge the uncertainty monster. What is that in layman's terms for me, please, if you don't mind?
Well, there's all sorts of different kinds of uncertainty. There's measurement uncertainty. There's data processing uncertainty. But more significantly, there's uncertainties about things that we don't even know about. Donald Rumsfeld's The Unknown Unknowns. And my concern about the IPCC is they really take shortcuts in terms of doing the work to try to understand and sometimes quantify the uncertainty, where they just use expert judgment. They have a group of experts in the room and they say, well, how much confidence should we place in this? Low, medium, whatever. And they negotiate, what the uncertainty levels and the confidence levels are without, doing the hard work. And further, even if you're scrupulous about quantifying the measurement uncertainties and the uncertainties of things in your models, you may be forgetting, or you may be omitting some genuinely important uncertainties related to the structural way that you frame the whole problem.
I think Judith might have just dropped out on us there. Sorry, Judith, we just lost the connection just very, very briefly, momentarily there. I'm glad we're back. But could that be a deliberate thing then? I mean, ultimately this is what it comes down to. Do you believe these mistakes made by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change are genuine, and they are made by people who genuinely believe and want to prove man's part in climate change and global warming? Or is it more sinister? Are these uncertainties and is this data being produced, and is it being presented to people deliberately in a way to skew it and to make people believe and to convince people that man-made climate change is real? What is it? Is it deliberate?
It's a very complex social contract between the IPCC scientists and the policymakers. The policymakers are concerned about dangerous climate change, and the IPCC is supposed to quantify the evidence for dangerous climate change. Well, that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy if in the process of all that you're neglecting to understand natural climate change. So the way the whole thing has been framed introduces a bias, and then you start to see certain scientists, their careers are being made by being associated with the IPCC and their reputation and their funding and all of this, their seats at big policy tables. I mean, all depends on this, and it just becomes sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it loses objectivity, which is what science should be about.
And you've rightly got a big problem with this, because there's such a imbalance, if you want to use that word, in terms of the funding. And you've pointed out many times over the years that there's little funding, if funding at all, going into studies which look at natural climate variability. And what's interesting, Judith, is I haven't studied, I've certainly not, I certainly don't have your qualifications and your knowledge and experience. But I listen to people as a journalist. I've interviewed many people over the years, and I've listened to people. And when you look into it as a genuinely interested, unbiased reporter, you find that our climate has changed far more dramatically through the millennia than it's changing now. And there were times when there was far more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than there is now. There were times when it was so warm in the United Kingdom that grapevines were grown and all of this. This is common enough knowledge, and you don't have to be a great researcher to find this stuff out. So why, in your opinion, is this not being discussed? Is this not being funded, this study into natural climate variability, when all the historic evidence, the geological evidence, people like Ian Plimer, of course, writing for years about it, shows us that so many crazy shifts in temperature happen over the millennia? What's really going on? Why are we not funding this type of study? Why is all the money going to those who want to convince people that man is changing the climate, therefore man must be stopped doing it? Why?
Well, there's an international imperative, a treaty, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, that's focused on dangerous human interference with the climate. And then when I say, how do you explain this previous things? And, the good data since 1950, let's focus on the period where we have really good data since 1950. My argument is that if you can't explain these previous periods, why should we be convinced by your explanation of the current warm period? So it's just, the politicians and certain segments of the science community seem to have some common interests, and there you have it. And, all of this is being challenged by a few climate scientists, but you see some major challenges in the blogosphere, where a lot of these challenges take place.
Let me come back to that. Sorry, Judith. Let me come back to that in a minute. That's a brilliant point, because whenever we see, and if you want, in a second, we can take a quick break if you want to. If you want to just take a 60-second break there to. I don't want to be so cross to blow your nose. I know what it's like to have a cold when you're doing these things. But listen, we'll talk in a minute about the consensus, because we keep getting told on national television and national radio, the vast majority of scientists, and that there is a consensus among scientists. I want to talk about that in a minute. But before that, you've just hit the nail on the head there, even for a layperson like me. We talk about everything from 1950 onwards, even though, as you know, and as I mentioned a minute ago, we have all this evidence of, crazy climate change going back a long, long time. So you have to look at the men and women in academia who are aggressively pushing the man-made climate change hoax, which I believe it is, Judith. That's me saying that. Have these people sold their souls to the devil? And I'm not going to mention anybody individually, because I know you've got to be diplomatic and you've got to maintain relationships. But many of these people are taking money and they know they're misrepresenting what's really happening, right?
Well, I'm not going to talk about individual scientists.
No, not individuals, no, but scientists in general. They must be doing it.
It's putting your thumb on the scale to only fund certain topics, and then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah. Beyond that, I don't really have anything to say.
I respect that. Fair enough. Consensus then. Whenever you read an article promoting it, whenever you see an interview on television talking about it, people are told that there is a consensus. Scientists have come together and they've all said that this is happening. Now, this isn't true, right? There are far more scientists who are challenging this than we are being led to believe.
Okay, what everyone agrees on are these three things. First, that the temperatures have overall been warming for several hundred years even. Second, humans emit carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And third, carbon dioxide has an infrared emission spectra. or a so-called greenhouse effect. Beyond that, there's very little agreement on any of this. The most consequential issues are the subject of intense debate, like how much of the recent warming is natural versus human cause. How will the 21st century climate play out? Is warming dangerous? And can we afford to do anything about it? I mean, all of those things are hotly debated. So when there's an agreement on some simple things, certain people then translate that into, well, of course we must stop burning fossil fuels. Well, that requires some very convoluted logic to go from the very straightforward things that everyone agrees on to insisting that we stop burning fossil fuels.
Which has had a massive effect on the economies of cities, of course, not just cities, but countries. To those who, like me, Judith, take this, a couple of steps further in terms of, conspiracy, I'm convinced that a lot of this is about changing the way we live. It's about state. Again, we talked about this in the first hour with a different guest on another issue. State encroachment further and further into our lives, telling us what we can do, what we can't do. Control has a lot to do with this, I believe. What do you think?
I'm not quite understanding the question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I didn't put it very well. You're right to to take me up on that. I believe that the promotion of the theory is more to do with a Orwellian type tyrannical state wanting to interfere more and more and more in our daily lives and telling us how we can live, what we can do, what we can't do, what we can eat, what we can't eat. Smart meters in your homes to measure your fuel, your gas usage, your oil usage, this sort of thing. It's about control, I believe.
Well, if you go back to the early history of all this, say in the 1980s, the UN Environmental Program and Maurice Strong were very much pushing for, global government with environmental concerns being a motivator, and they latched on to the climate change issue as a good cause to center that around. So there is that sort of history behind all this, and there are some politicians and international organizations that are hoping for that kind of an outcome. So it's a very complex social issue behind all this.
We've got Dr. Judith Curry on the line, folks. This is fascinating stuff. She left her position at Georgia Tech. She's skeptical of the whole climate change theory that people that we are causing catastrophic global warming. She's been attacked for that. That must have been a big decision, Judith, to leave Georgia Tech because of that, because of the politicisation of it. I mean, give us an idea of your frame of mind at that particular time. It can't have been easy, that.
This has been coming for about 3 or 4 years, really, so it wasn't a sudden decision. It's something that's been coming for 3 or 4 years. I could see the writing on the wall, and there was a really mismatch between what I thought was important and what I wanted to do versus what was really acceptable, not to mention rewarded in the university environment. So, I took a couple years to situate myself where I could afford to leave my university position. But I'm much happier and much more effective, I think, as an independent scientist.
We have had a lot of tweets on this, many tweets. Many of them, or most of them, are in support of what you're saying, Judith. We like to get the opposite point of view, obviously, on shows like this for a bit of balance, but in general, people are agreeing with it. I mean, we've spoken to many people about this. We've had the meteorologist Piers Corbyn on the programme many times talking about it. Do you know what's interesting, Judith? And you probably won't be surprised by this. And one of the things I can claim is I can claim absolute honesty. I've got no agenda. I will give my opinion, but I don't have any agenda for saying that. But whenever we invite somebody like you on the programme, now I didn't do it today because it wouldn't have been ethical. I spoke to you on Friday and I invited you on the programme, and I didn't propose that we have a debate, so I didn't invite anybody on this time. But in general, whenever we invite somebody like you on the programme, somebody from academia, when we contact the Green Party or Greenpeace or Friends of the Earth, they never put anybody forward for the debate. Do you know that? They will not do it.
Oh, yeah, well, nobody wants to debate me.
You know, and I know you're not being arrogant. I've read a lot about you, and I've heard you doing other interviews. They will not come on. And again, you know, maybe I should try to maintain some level of objectivity, but I can't, because there is no evidence whatsoever historically to suggest that man's activity is changing the climate. It comes down to, it's as black and white as that, isn't it? There is no evidence, and these people cannot offer any evidence.
Well, there are hypotheses. There are some known physical mechanisms, but the key issue, few people question that humans have some impact on the climate. The more relevant question is how much. Are humans dominating the recent warming, or is it just a small effect? That's what we don't know.
What do you think? You've been researching this for a long time. You're certainly not an old woman, you're not, but you've been at this a long time. Your qualifications are impeccable. What do you think? Do you think, I know you're going to tell me everything is possible, everything is feasible. What's your reasoned opinion, your gut feeling, even though you don't go by gut feelings in science? Is there any evidence that we might be even contributing to it on any scale, even on a tiny scale? Or is it not?
On a tiny scale, yeah. I mean, you could see urban heat island effects, CO2, and particles in the atmosphere have known influences on the Earth's radiation balance. Yeah, I mean, it would be very hard to argue that humans have no impact on the climate.
But even if they are having a tiny, tiny impact, obviously the follow-up question for anybody with any intelligence would be, would that be a permanent impact, or would it be a temporary impact? And that's another fair question to ask, isn't it?
Well, the climate system is a complex thing. I mean, it takes a lot of time for climate to respond and for the oceans sort of act as a flywheel. So the effects of a major perturbation to the climate could be felt centuries down the road. Yeah. So, you know, it's not this sort of real simple force and response kind of system.
I mentioned Piers Corbyn a minute ago. He's the brother of the leader of the British Labour Party. I know you know this. Jeremy Corbyn is the leader of the Labour Party. Piers Corbyn was asked the question by me on this programme a year ago. Before I tell you what I asked him, I just want to mention again, we've got Dr. Judith Curry on the line. I'm going to tweet out links, Judith, to where people can read you and find out more about you. Judith is an absolutely qualified academic. She has been attacked many, many times for questioning the claims made by the IPCC and other scientists who use climate models to claim that humans are the main cause of global warming. It's good to have her on the programme. She's not feeling the best today, and we won't keep you much longer, Judith. I'm aware of the fact that you're not feeling well, and I don't want to keep you too long. You'd probably be better off in bed by the sounds of it. But thanks for staying with us. Listen, I put it to Piers Corbyn that there is a growing and growing and growing belief, not just by conspiracy researchers, but by meteorologists, including him, that unknown to people, because it hasn't been made public or made official, there's an aerosol spraying program going on. And
I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to comment on that one.
Why not?
Yeah. It's not a subject that I pay any attention to. So um, you could talk to somebody else about that.
You're telling me you don't have an opinion either way, or you think it's ludicrous, or what is it?
I pay no attention to that subject.
Why not?
Because I have better things to do with my time.
So if these people, the people who claim that global warming is real,
yeah, okay.
If these people were to be trying to take steps to prevent that or do something about it, and not telling people about that, that's not something you're interested in.
I'm not going to go there. No.
Where's this go? We'll finish with this then. I'm very surprised at that. We'll finish with this then. Where's this going to end this? Where's it going to go from here? I mean, the Mail on Sunday story yesterday is absolutely staggering. That this organisation, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, breaching its own rules, putting out data that's basically nonsense around the Paris Climate Conference. This is like a steamroller, this agenda, to convince people that man is causing irreversible damage to the climate and to the environment. Where's it all going to end? Where do people like you go from here to combat this very one-sided debate, the very one-sided funding of the issue? What do you do from here?
Stand up and speak out for the integrity of scientific research and climate data, which is what I do. Engage the public, which I do with my blog. I do a fair number of interviews. That's pretty much all I can do. When I'm called upon by governments or other groups to present testimony, I do that. So that's pretty much what I could do as an individual. Where all this is going, I don't really know.
You mentioned there getting called by governments and the like. How often is that? I mean, I would imagine because governments are signed up to this, because governments don't want to debate this, I would imagine, and not to be putting too fine a point on it, I would imagine that your phone is not ringing in terms of governments calling you to come and present the other side of the story. Am I right?
Well, I testify in front of U.S. Congress about once a year.
And how does that go, Judith? I mean, when you do that, what's the result of that? What happens with that testimony? How is it used?
It's used by the congressmen to support their decision making.
But not in a way that reflects any balance in the debate, ultimately, right?
That's politics. That's not what I do. What I do is provide the best scientific evidence and analysis that I can. And then it's up to them to do whatever they want to do with it.
Judith, I want to thank you for coming on. You could have cried off today with the... you've obviously got a heavy cold there. I appreciate you coming on the programme and putting that... putting your side of it to us. I really appreciate it. Thanks for doing it. Look after yourself, and we'll watch you closely.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Judith. Dr. Judith Curry there on the line to us from New York State. New York City in the first there, New York State. I wasn't surprised she wasn't going to go down the route of geoengineering. I'm not disappointed by it. I think when you ask people... I mean, we asked Christopher... What's his name? Moncton, of course. Searching my memory there. We asked Moncton this, and Moncton rubbished it and said it was nonsense. I asked Piers Corbyn, and Piers said, yes, it's definitely happening. It's definitely going on. There's no doubt about it. As the meteorologist, we can see it. But most academics in her position, because they want to maintain, I suppose, in their own mind anyway, even though they are pilloried by the climate science hoaxers, because the climate science industry absolutely hammers people like Dr. Judith Curry. Rather than, I suppose, I don't know, I shouldn't really say what... No, I'm not going to say what I was going to say. To maintain in academic circles, I suppose, some level of respectability when the area of geoengineering and aerosol spraying comes up, generally you get the blanket, I'm not going to talk about that kind of a thing, which is disappointing, I suppose. It will be for some of our listeners. For me, it's not really, it's wholly unsurprising. Listen, there is no evidence. There is no evidence whatsoever to support the idea that man's activity on the planet is causing irreversible climate change. That is complete and utter nonsense. There is an abundance of evidence to suggest that man's activity is doing damage to the environment, to the sea, to the oceans, to the forests, to the countryside, to our lakes and our rivers. There's no doubt about that. When they talked about plastic in our oceans, that's very, very serious. And that has to be dealt with. When fish are being dissected and whales are being dissected and we're finding massive amounts of plastic in their systems, that's an absolute disaster and it must be stopped. But it's got nothing whatsoever to do with climate change. It's completely two different issues. And most people I've interviewed over the years are quite happy to say, well, yes, we need to be cleaner. Absolutely, we need to be cleaner. Why can't we use renewable energy sources? That being said, there's no evidence that burning coal or burning oil is doing any damage to the atmosphere or changing the climate. There isn't. And like I mentioned to Judith Curry, cities, economies have been destroyed. I can talk for hours on what happened to the miners here in this country. I can talk for hours on it. Whole countries' economies have been destroyed by this nonsense, no doubt about that. But I can listen to the argument all day that we need to be cleaner. Yes, we need to be cleaner. There's no doubt about that. But we are not changing our climate. You know, I'm not going to play any of the Ian Plimer video again, not for the 500th time, or any of the other academic men and women who've talked about the history of massive changes in temperature on this planet over the millennia that predate the Industrial Revolution by thousands of years. Grapes being grown in Yorkshire, in this country, centuries ago. That isn't bullshit. That's borne out by the data sourced by some of the world's great geologists. It's all the evidence, as Plimer says. It's in the rocks. It's in the seas. We sequester our carbon dioxide in the seas. There's hardly any CO2 in the atmosphere now compared to thousands of years ago. She said herself, we've been warming for hundreds of years because we're coming out of an ice age. But isn't it staggering that these liars, and she wouldn't call them that, and I admire her for that, she's got to deal with these people. These liars will only talk about what's happened for 50 years, 60 years. And some of these scientists taking major grants, taking major books from these think tanks and from these NGO groups who want to promote this climate hoax bullshit. Most of these scientists know damn well that our climate has changed, sometimes extraordinarily. Even from the 17 to 1800s, we've seen the graphs presented by people like Plimer. Extraordinary spikes where we didn't even have winters. It was so warm in places. You know? But a lot of comments coming in on Twitter about her attitude to geoengineering. You can only ask. You can only ask. But don't expect people like her to go there, because they want to maintain some modicum of respectability. She thinks she's better off going to Congress every year. I asked her the killer question. She didn't like it very much. What does Congress do with the evidence you present? The answer is they wipe their arses with it. Doesn't make a blind bit of difference. She said, oh, well, that's a political thing. No, it isn't. It's called window dressing. We better look like we're getting the other side of it, so we'll invite Dr. Judith Curry. And then we will wipe our anuses with the information she gives us. Doesn't matter that she's absolutely right. She's 100% on the money. Doesn't matter. To maintain an air of objectivity and an air of balance, we'll invite her and maybe one or two people like her. And I suppose to preserve that, she won't talk about geoengineering because she'll be labelled a lunatic. That's what she thinks anyway. You know, but there are other people, Piers Corbyn amongst them, who doesn't care. See, well, it's the truth. I can see it. We can see it when we observe the atmosphere, when we are doing our weather forecasts. We can see what's going on. It's right there in front of our eyes. We can't deny it. See it here in Manchester. Once every 2 weeks, the sky blanketed in these tic-tac-toe X's and O's crisscross trails that last for hours. And then they thin out and they form this milky sheen over the sky for miles. And the assholes, and Judith Curry is not an asshole, she's a terrific woman. The assholes in the media tell you it's a stupid conspiracy theory. They are jet contrails. It's just water vapour. Yeah, that hangs around for hours. Oxford University said 2 years ago, our bees are dying from dementia. We're finding high levels of aluminium in our bees. I wonder where that's coming from. But chemtrails is a stupid conspiracy theory by tinfoil hat wearing lunatic anoraks. That's what it is.